I shouldn't have laughed. Not that time. Not when he handed me that shaky little blueprint and explained the idea like it was the next great invention. But I did. I laughed, and I thought it was harmless, until I realized later how sharply he'd flinched, like the air itself had bitten him. That memory keeps looping now, even though he's gone, thriving without me. And here I am, still staring at her, the older woman who watched me mock him, like she knows something I don't. It's a Tuesday morning at the repair shop, the one tucked between a laundromat and a diner, smelling faintly of motor oil and burnt coffee. I'm leaning over the counter, wiping grease off my hands with a rag that's seen better days, and she's there, standing on the other side of the workbench. She's mid-40s, but there's an elegance that doesn't need polish. Soft gray threads in her hair catching the fluorescent light, sleeves rolled up as if she could get her hands dirty any second, and eyes that scan the cluttered room like she owns not just the space, but the air in it. I watch her adjust a stack of papers, small, deliberate movements. Something about her posture, slightly tense, but unflinchingly steady, makes me hesitate in a way I never do around anyone else. The awkward electricity isn't in words. It's in the pause when our hands brush over the same wrench, the fraction of a second before she lifts her gaze, and for a heartbeat, the world narrows to us. "You're careful," she says finally, tilting her head like she's reading me, not just the tool in my hand. I clear my throat. I try not to break things. My voice sounds smaller than I meant. She smiles, a twitch at the corner of her lips. Not the full grin, but a hint, enough to make me wonder if she notices me noticing her. She doesn't say more, and I don't either, though the words bounce around my chest like they're waiting for permission to escape. Earlier, I had joked about how hopeless he'd been, about how he could barely tighten a bolt without mangling it. The memory of her glance then, watching me laugh, lips pressed together, eyes sharp and patient, makes me shiver. Not because I'm scared, but because there's something in her that sees through the surface. Something like awareness, or maybe judgment, maybe both. She picks up a small screwdriver, spins it in her fingers like it's the most ordinary thing in the world, and I realize I'm holding my breath. She doesn't rush, doesn't speak, doesn't guide. She simply exists in the space, and the air hums around her. Then she nods slightly at a loose panel I've been circling, just a flick of a gesture, almost casual. But it's enough. Enough that I straighten instinctively, suddenly conscious of how I stand, how I speak, how I even breathe. The bell above the shop door jingles, and I glance toward it, but my eyes drift back to her. She's already walking away, but there's a weight in the way she moves, light, yet deliberate. I want to follow, to ask a question, to laugh or apologize, anything. But I don't. Instead, I linger, staring at the spot where her hand brushed mine, where the air had briefly thickened with something I can't name. Something unspoken. And I realize I'm thinking about it hours later, even now. Her small nod, the twitch of her lips, the pause that lasted too long to be accidental. I mock him, I laugh at what he tried to do, but her glance made it feel like everything mattered, even the things I'd thrown away. I can't stop thinking about it. The repair shop smells of oil and old cardboard again, but today there's a faint trace of something different. Coffee she brewed an hour ago, slightly bitter, and the faint musk of rain that started tapping against the windows. She's at the counter, sorting through invoices, brow furrowed just enough that it doesn't feel staged. I linger nearby, pretending to organize tools, but really just watching. She doesn't look up when I approach. "Do you need help with that?" I ask, gesturing to the stack of papers. Her fingers pause mid-flip, and for a moment, she bites her lip, hard, almost imperceptibly, and I catch the subtle tremor of tension in her hand. She's not used to letting anyone in, I think. Not like this. "I might," she says finally, voice flat but not unkind. I kneel beside the cabinet she's been struggling with, fumbling with the latch. My fingers brush hers for just a second. She flinches, then freezes, waiting. The air thickens, charged with a quiet intensity neither of us acknowledges out loud. You've got a lot going on, I say, nodding toward the paperwork. My tone is casual, but I feel my stomach tighten as I speak. She glances at me, just for a heartbeat, and something flickers in her eyes. Exhaustion? Regret? Maybe both. She lets out a small sigh, and I notice the faint shadows under her eyes, the slight slump in her shoulders. She's guarded, always guarding, but in that moment, she's human. Not the confident, untouchable woman I first saw. Just her. Vulnerable, maybe more than she lets anyone see. I don't say anything more. I just pass her a screwdriver she dropped, our hands touching lightly again. She doesn't withdraw immediately, just holds it for a fraction longer than necessary. That small hesitation feels heavy, like it carries weight we don't speak of. We work in silence for a few minutes. I hear her hum under her breath, soft and off-key, like she's half listening to herself, half listening to the rain outside. I glance at her hands, slender, precise, with small scars that tell their own story. The way she taps the counter lightly when she's thinking, the slight curl of her fingers as she sets things down, it's hypnotizing. I don't usually let anyone handle this, she says suddenly, almost whispering, as if she's afraid the words might shatter the moment. I pause, screwdriver in hand, caught off guard. Her eyes flick up to mine, not accusing, not pleading, just open, fragile in a way that makes my chest ache. I'll be careful, I manage, though I realize it's more than about the tool. Her gaze lingers, and she exhales slowly. The briefest flicker of something softer, maybe trust, maybe curiosity, passes between us. I notice it, but I don't push. I just hand her the wrench she asked for, and our fingers brush again. It's nothing, really, and yet everything. She straightens suddenly, like she's reclaiming herself, and I feel the pull, the quiet, forbidden energy between us. I want to say something, to break the tension, but the moment is already perfect in its restraint. She smiles, tiny and fleeting, as she returns to her work, and I catch myself staring a moment too long. The way her hair falls across her face, the softness in her eyes, the almost imperceptible exhale she lets out when she thinks no one's watching. It's enough to make me forget the world outside the shop. And then, just as I'm about to speak, she looks up, our eyes meet, and she tilts her head slightly, as if daring me to understand without words. I don't move. I can't. And I don't think I wanted the rain started in soft taps, then turned into a drumbeat against the repair shop's corrugated roof. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, reflecting off the damp floor. We'd stayed behind longer than usual, sorting through a pile of returned parts and invoices. I was crouched by a shelf, checking the tiny screws for rust, when I felt her presence before I heard her speak. "Careful with that," she said, voice low, almost drowned out by the rain. I looked up and caught her leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, a single curl of gray hair falling over her temple. She didn't move closer, but the space between us felt compressed, as if the room had shrunk just enough to make every breath shared. I stood, holding a loose gear, unsure whether to put it down or keep it in my hands like some excuse to remain near her. "It's fine," I said softly. My words sounded too loud in the quiet room, yet too small to matter. She tilted her head, watching me fumble. For a moment, I thought she might step closer. Her fingers itched to reach, or maybe she wanted to, I couldn't tell. I could feel the unspoken, the tension, the hesitation, the possibility. My chest tightened, a quiet panic thrumming beneath my ribs. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it quickly, a name flashing that I didn't recognize, and her face tightened, just slightly. Not anger, not sadness exactly, but a flicker of something unguarded. The moment shattered like thin glass. I swallowed, realizing how close I'd come to saying something I couldn't take back. Something like, "I can't stop thinking about you." But instead, I merely nodded toward the counter. "Everything okay?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's fine." she said, slipping the phone into her pocket. The pause lingered, heavy, charged with a secret neither of us named. We returned to our work, side by side, but closer than usual. My shoulder brushed hers when I reached for a wrench. She didn't flinch, didn't move away. That tiny, unintentional contact made my heart thud in a way I hadn't expected, and I caught myself holding my breath, hoping she'd notice it, or maybe hoping she wouldn't. The storm outside intensified, rain slashing sideways against the windows. A flash of lightning lit her face, sharp, vulnerable, and impossibly beautiful. I almost spoke, almost let the words tumble out, but the distant rumble of thunder seemed to mock my restraint. She glanced at me briefly, lips pressed together as if holding back a thought, a smile, a warning. Her eyes flicked down to the papers again, and my pulse slowed in protest. The room felt suspended in that almost, a fragile balance where everything teetered on the edge of confession. And then, just as I leaned a fraction closer, almost touching her arm, a knock on the back door startled us both. She jumped, heart suddenly veiled behind her composure, and I stepped back, cursed softly under my breath, and pretended I was adjusting the tools. The moment evaporated, leaving only the echo of what nearly happened. The storm raged outside, but the quiet between us was heavier than any downpour, and I found myself staring at her hands, wishing for a reason to linger closer, knowing I couldn't. Not yet. The shop was quiet, too quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the smell of wet asphalt and motor oil hanging in the air. I was sitting on a low stool, idly wiping a tool with a rag, while she leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, watching me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. I don't know why I'm here," she said suddenly, voice low, but not rushed. It wasn't about the shop, it wasn't about the tools, it was about everything else, everything we hadn't said. I froze, rag in hand. The words lingered between us, thick and suffocating. I wanted to speak, to reassure her, to make some kind of sense of it, but I didn't know how. I just nodded slowly, pretending that my silence could answer for me. She sighed, small, almost inaudible. "We're pretending, aren't we?" she whispered. "Pretending it's just work, just coincidence, just nothing." I swallowed, heart hammering. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone in feeling this, that I'd been thinking about it, about her, about the way she looked at me sometimes, for weeks. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I reached for another tool, pretending the movement was casual, letting my fingers brush hers by accident. Or maybe not by accident. She didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. She just looked at me, eyes narrowed, and I felt as if she could see straight into the parts of me I tried to keep hidden. The longing, the guilt, the quiet obsession with moments like this. "What are we doing?" she said finally, voice breaking slightly. "Why does it feel like this shouldn't exist?" I opened my mouth, closed it again. There was no answer that wouldn't make things worse. No words that wouldn't push us closer to something we couldn't handle. The silence stretched, heavy, almost alive. I noticed the small things about her. The way her fingers curled around the edge of the bench, how her lips trembled as she spoke, the faint line of worry etched between her brows. Vulnerable, and yet impossibly composed. She started again, then stopped, swallowing. She glanced away, but I could see the flicker of something breaking through, maybe fear, maybe longing. I wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, but my hands stayed where they were, heavy with restraint. She looked back at me, eyes glistening with an emotion she refused to name. The silence pressed down on us, louder than any words could be. I realized we could no longer pretend this was normal, that we could go back to the easy rhythm of daily work. Something had shifted. Finally, she spoke, almost a whisper, but it hit me like a hammer. "I don't want to ruin you. Or me." The words hung in the air, devastating in their honesty. I wanted to tell her that wasn't possible anymore, that whatever we were, it had already begun, but I didn't. I only sat there, staring, the rag slipping from my hands, the quiet between us swallowing everything. And in that silence, I understood nothing would ever be normal again. The afternoon light slanted through the dusty windows, casting long rectangles across the floor. I was stacking parts on a shelf when she appeared in the doorway, holding a small, worn envelope. Her hands shook just enough for me to notice, and I stopped, mid-motion, staring at her. "I found this," she said quietly, voice hesitant. She held it out, like it carried the weight of the world. The envelope was old, edges frayed, and it had her name scrawled in a familiar, elegant hand. I stepped closer, gently taking it from her. She didn't flinch. She just watched, pale and still, as I examined the handwriting. My heart thudded, because I knew. I knew who it was. "From him?" I asked softly, nodding toward the envelope. She swallowed, biting the inside of her cheek, and looked down at her shoes. "Yeah, it's been years. I thought I'd moved on. I thought I forgot." Her voice cracked slightly, barely audible, but it cut through the hum of the shop like a shard of glass. I noticed her hands, pale and tense, gripping the edges of the counter. Her vulnerability made me want to say something reassuring, but I held back, letting her find her own words. I never got to say goodbye," she admitted. "Not really. He just disappeared, and I kept pretending it didn't hurt, pretending it was fine." Her eyes flicked up at mine for a moment, a glimmer of something raw and fragile, then quickly away again. I remembered her laugh from weeks ago, the way it had carried a trace of wistfulness I hadn't understood at the time. I said nothing, just placed a hand lightly over hers on the counter. She stiffened for a heartbeat, then relaxed slightly, not enough to be comfortable, but enough to let me know it was safe. "I'm sorry," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "I didn't mean to." I shook my head. "You don't need to explain," I said softly. "I get it. I know what it's like to lose someone and not have closure." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, the layers of guarded composure she wore every day slipped just enough for me to see the quiet ache beneath. I wanted to reach closer, to offer some comfort beyond words, but I stopped. I didn't want to push her away by moving too fast, by doing too much. She exhaled slowly, finally letting the tension bleed out of her shoulders. The envelope still lay between us, small and fragile, like the weight of all her unspoken grief. Then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. Not a full smile, not a relief, but a tentative acknowledgement that she was seen. Seen in a way she hadn't been in years. And as she turned away to place the envelope back on a shelf, I felt something inside me shift, too. A quiet tremor that had nothing to do with the tools, nothing to do with the work, but everything to do with her story, her pain, the trust she had let me glimpse for just a fraction of a moment. She didn't look back, but I could feel the pull between us, silent, potent, and irreversible. And I realized I'd never forget the way her hands had trembled that day. This part introduces emotional revelation, human, understated reactions, and an inner tremor that changes the dynamic, building momentum toward emotional entanglement. The shop was quiet again, the evening sun a muted glow through the grimy windows. Tools lay scattered across the benches, receipts curled in corners, and the faint smell of motor oil mingled with the lingering trace of her perfume. I was on the floor, tightening a loose bolt, when I felt her presence behind me, warm but tentative. "You've been at this all day," she said softly, leaning against the workbench. Her voice carried no judgment, just observation, a kind of care I hadn't expected. I glanced up, and our eyes met for the briefest instant. I stood slowly, wiping grease from my hands. "I like fixing things," I said, trying to sound casual, though my chest thumped in a way that made the words feel hollow. She nodded, watching me, and then she came closer, carrying a small tray of coffee. She set it down beside me, and our fingers brushed briefly. It wasn't dramatic, not intentional, but it made my stomach twist and my heart stutter. Neither of us pulled away. We worked side by side, quiet, sharing the same space without needing to fill it with words. I noticed her hands again, how she moved them deliberately, carefully, brushing a stray hair from her face, adjusting a loose sleeve. She noticed me noticing, I could tell, and she didn't comment. She just let it happen. I don't know how we got here, she said finally, voice low. Not a confession, not a declaration, but an acknowledgement of the unspoken truth between us. I swallowed. I don't either, I admitted, and I meant it. It wasn't about clarity or answers. It was about being present, about accepting what had quietly grown over weeks, in stolen glances, in pauses too long to ignore. She smiled, small, private, and for a moment the tension softened. There was no rush, no drama, just the subtle understanding that had been building between us. The recognition that whatever this was, we couldn't deny it anymore. I reached out, almost by instinct, and my fingers brushed hers as I adjusted a loose cable. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Our hands lingered together for a second longer than necessary, small, intimate, and entirely ordinary. Yet it felt monumental. We stayed like that for a while, moving in silence, occasionally nodding or adjusting tools, never speaking. And in that quiet, I realized the truth of it, that we had arrived here not with a grand gesture, but with small, earned moments, moments of attention, patience, and silent acknowledgement. Finally, she leaned slightly closer, just enough for our shoulders to brush. I felt the weight of it, the inevitability, but neither of us forced it into words. It didn't need words. The sun dipped lower, the light fading, and we remained side by side, hands nearly touching, hearts quietly aligned without declaration or expectation. And in that unspoken understanding, I knew this was enough. Enough to stay, enough to see each other fully, enough to begin, together, without saying it aloud. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the need to move, to speak, to act. I just let the moment exist. This part delivers the emotional climax, mutual acknowledgement, and a small, intimate physical detail that seals their bond realistically without turning into a fairy tale confession. Looking back now, months later, it's strange how ordinary it all feels, and yet how impossible it would have been to imagine then. The repair shop, the rain, the scattered tools, they weren't just settings. They were markers of a shift, of quiet moments that changed everything. I think about her a lot, not in the obsessive, all-consuming way I sometimes feared I would, but in the way that people carry small, luminous truths with them, like a talisman or a secret. She's older now in my memory than she was then, though she hasn't changed a single way that matters. Her patience, her quiet attention, the way she notices the smallest detail, it's still what lingers in my chest. I've changed, too. The boy who once mocked and dismissed, the one who couldn't see what was right in front of him, is gone. I notice things now, the tilt of a shoulder, a pause in speech, the way someone hesitates before sharing a story. And I listen. I don't just hear. She taught me something I hadn't understood before, that love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly, almost imperceptibly, through shared glances, gentle nudges, unspoken understanding. Sometimes it's the acknowledgement of someone's existence in your life in ways you can't fully define. We still meet in the shop sometimes, still side by side, hands brushing over the same wrench, but there's no pressure, no urgency. There's only the weightless familiarity of someone who knows you and allows you to be exactly who you are. And for the first time, I think I understand the beauty in that simplicity. I see her laugh without restraint now, without the shadow of past hurt creeping behind her eyes. I see her relax in ways she never allowed herself before. And I realize that part of loving someone is giving them permission to be unguarded, to let the world see them without fear. Sometimes, when the shop is quiet and the sunlight spills across the counters, I catch her watching me, the smallest smile tugging at her lips. And I think back to all those moments, brief touches, awkward pauses, unspoken truths, that built the bridge between us. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive, but it was enough. We didn't need grand confessions or cinematic declarations. What we built was earned, real, and lasting. And in that, I've learned something permanent, that love can exist in silence, in hesitation, in the tiny acknowledgments that go unnoticed by the world but feel enormous to the heart. And now, sitting here, looking at her across the workbench as she hums softly to herself, I know that even after all the mistakes, the laughter at the wrong time, the storms, everything has led to this. A quiet smile spreads across my face, and I realize I wouldn't change a single moment. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?